Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the CCBA. I am the president of the CCBA, Raymond Sang, and welcome everyone here and the candidates as well. So being that this is a candidate forum, I'm not going to take too much time. I just want to let you know there are exits all around. Just look for the exit signs, bathrooms in the back, and please be respectful of anyone that's on stage and save your comments for later on. I'm going to pass this on to Don Hong from UA3, and he will say a few more words than me, hopefully. So, thank you.
I do want to thank CCBA, Raymond Sang, for giving us the opportunity to use this facility. There's a lot of history in CCBA. The UA3 forum that we're doing here is a little bit different. Everybody here has been contacted through nonprofits or religious organizations. We really didn't contact any political or what do you call those people? District leaders at all. It was all through nonprofits, so it's a little bit of a different twist. But at this point, I want to go straight to our candidates. And David Lee from LAANY, who has a lot of years of experience and a good friend. I'm going to hand it over to you, David.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, President Sang. Thank you to all the community groups that have been participating in this. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for showing up tonight. It's my pleasure to do the newly drawn District 27 Candidate Forum. LAANY is a nonpartisan group. We've held dozens of candidate forums last year, including mayoral, borough president, district attorney, city council, state legislative forums. So we're very interested in who represents our community here. I look forward to a pleasant discussion, an informative discussion. I ask that you hold your applause to the end and any comments held till the forum is over. And with that, I'd like to introduce the candidates and in alphabetical order. And that would start with Danyela Egorov to the far left. And then we have Vittoria Fariello and Senator Brian Kavanagh. Danyela, would you like to say a few words to say hello?
Yes, thank you so much for having me, and thank you to the local organizations who put this event together. I'm a public school parent. I'm vice president of CC District 2, and if I have the honor of serve our community as state senator, public safety and education will be my top priorities. Thank you.
Thank you. Vittoria?
Hi, my name is Vittoria Fariello. I am a district leader in Lower Manhattan. I'm also a lawyer with a background in anti-corruption, and I am running to make sure that we can all afford to stay in our homes, that we can all have health care, and that we have a government that is honest and accountable to the people. And I want to thank the CCBA and UA3 for hosting this.
Thank you. And Senator Kavanagh.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be with you. It's a great pleasure also to be on the stage, I think for the first time, all three of us in the same space to talk about this important race. I'm State Senator Brian Kavanagh. I've been serving in the Senate for 4.5 years, including representing this community, Chinatown, where we're sitting, and I spent 11 years before that in the Assembly. I'm very proud to run on what I think of as a really tremendous record in the last few years of state government working to address big problems. As the chair of the Housing Committee, I've worked on a lot of our big challenges on housing affordability during the pandemic, keeping people safe from the pandemic and also from the economic consequences of that. Very committed to working with all of you on public safety in this community, which we've heard a lot about. And I also just want to add my thanks to CCBA and UA3 and LAANY for joining together to sponsor this event this evening.
Thank you. So just a little information on the format. I will have 4 main questions followed by a lightning round. I will ask the candidates to answer within about 2 minutes, please. If any of the candidates are mentioned within the answer, the person who is mentioned will have 1 minute to rebut that issue. So through a random pick, my first question will be to Senator Kavanagh, followed by Ms. Fariello, and I'm sorry, yes, Ms. Ms. Egorov, and then Ms. Fariello. So my first question is on the economy. Store vacancies, hesitancy of workers to return to the office, rising gas and food prices are everywhere. But here we're in Chinatown, which is suffering from a tremendous loss in visitors, and with the sidewalks rolled back at 8 p.m. in the evening. Do you have any specific plans to revitalize small business activity, sort of like a Marshall Plan, that can be scaled to other parts of the district as well? Senator Kavanagh?
Thank you for the question. You know, it's a critical issue here in Chinatown and really throughout the city, especially our business districts like this one that rely on foot traffic and the kind of vibrant activity that we had for many years. We have taken steps to put state money into revitalization efforts. We have the largest ever downtown revitalization initiative, $20 million, that was granted to this community, and there are various organizations working to figure out how to best spend that to revitalize the community. We also, you know, I think public safety, which I assume we'll talk about in another question, but I think that making sure people understand that the community is safe, the streets are safe, our subways are safe, I think is also a big part of people who are, you know, staying home and working remotely, feeling comfortable getting into our city and enjoying the nightlife. We also do need to work on repurposing some of the real estate that we have. I passed a bill recently that the governor signed that will allow hotels to be converted into permanent housing. We need to look more at office space to make sure there are vital uses of those that are bringing people to the city. I don't think we're going to ever get back to exactly the same patterns in our city of work, of entertainment, of recreation that we had before COVID. People's attitudes about things have changed. People's practices have changed. People have learned how to do things remotely that they used to have to come into the central city to do. So we are going to have to adapt, but I'm confident that working with this community, which has always been very resilient and knows how to support each other mutually and also knows how to seek what they need from government, I'm confident that we will get back to where we need to be.
Thank you, Senator. Ms. Egorov, do you need a repeat question or?
I think the most impactful thing for our economy would be to solve the crime problem in New York City. That's why tourists are not coming to our city. That's why I talk to so many business owners here in Chinatown who are closing their business at 5 p.m. because they are afraid of the crime. And that's why people don't want to go out at night in the city. And the reality in our city is that you have a DA who is refusing to do his job. He wrote a memo saying all the crimes that he will not prosecute. It is not his job to decide which crimes and what is the law. That's the legislature job. And so that is the main thing that I'm going to focus on. I'm going to make sure that the DA is removed, working with the governor, so we can actually have a DA who does his job. I'm going to work to repeal bail reform, so whatever crime is committed in the city, there is a consequence, whether it's corruption on Wall Street, if it is shoplifting, or if it is hate crimes in our communities. And I'm going to support the NYPD because I have talked to so many police officers who are so demoralized. They arrest people who then are being released sometimes on the same day. In my local pharmacy, I've been at 7:30 a.m. with my 5-year-old, and there is a guy who steals products of that pharmacy every week. The manager knows him, all the people in the first precinct knows him, and he gets released on the same day and comes back to the pharmacy. Until we solve public safety, our economy is not going to be back, and I'm not ready to give up on New York City. I think we're going to have tourists back. People are really wanted to go to entertainment. There's just so much that attracts people to this city, and once we have public safety solved, New York City is going to be back.
Thank you. Ms. Fariello.
Thank you. So I do agree that safety is a big concern, and this is a bit of a catch-22 because I do think once we bring our businesses back, our small businesses back, that's going to help with the safety issues as well. Our small businesses really struggle with having access to the funds to help them get onto their feet. A lot of the stuff that you do as a small business has a lot of red tape, a lot of bureaucracy. It's hard to access. My husband and I run a small law firm, so I know what it's like to have to weather the COVID was very difficult, and if anyone here actually had to go through that, you know how difficult it was to get any assistance, and then to actually be able to make it actually, once you've been approved, to actually get the funds. Hopefully we're moving on from COVID, but we need to make sure that our women and minority owned businesses have access to the funds to help them come back. Yes, we definitely want to repurpose our empty office buildings, and we want to make sure that we have more people back on the streets. Again, eyes on the streets is very helpful. Another big part that from my conversations with a lot of small business people has been the rent. The rent has been really a huge burden. And having systems in place that would help rent control, not necessarily a rent control system for commercial rents, but certainly limitations and something much more reasonable. Stories I've heard is that they've had to shell out, $100,000 for as a down payment for a store. So these are barriers that we want to take away and let our small businesses flourish.
Thank you. My next question is on housing. We're going to start with Ms. Egorov first. Gentrification continues to occur in the area, threatening affordable housing units. Meanwhile, new market rate development is seen as an economic driver. Equity and access to public housing has been identified as an issue. Small property owners are suffering from revenues that are affected by regulations that prevent them from keeping up with their expenses. So if elected to office, what housing policy would you focus on in the legislature? Ms. Egorov.
So I think this is a very important issue, and we need to continue making sure that there are incentives and support for public housing, because as you mentioned, gentrification is really driving rent prices and housing price in general in our district. I really think that we need to continue all the supports that we have for seniors, for people with disabilities in some cases, and really make sure that the people who are living in NYCHA really are receiving the services that they deserve. So I've heard also from many people in our district who are surprised sometimes about the amount of investment that is being invested, but then they don't have the basic services in their houses being delivered when they need something to be fixed in their houses. So I really think that would be a very important issue.
Thank you. Ms. Fariello.
Thank you. So this is near and dear to my heart. I care a lot. I think you use the term gentrification. I would actually use the word displacement. What happens when we allow these developers come in and build luxury apartments is that it prices out everyone else in the community. And that's hugely problematic. Our programs have allowed developers to build huge buildings with only 20% affordability. That means 80% luxury. And what that's going to do is price everyone out of the neighborhood. So we can't be giving developers these types of tax breaks unless we're actually getting what we need for the community. In terms of our public housing, it should be fully public money. There should be no private money in the system, because once you introduce private money, then the goal becomes a maximization of profits. And that's hugely problematic. Another part of this is tenants should have a voice in the management. It is the people who live there who know what is needed and how it can be addressed, how it can be best addressed. I think we, and of course, the other thing, of course, has been the oversight of the money that has been going to NYCHA. And as I said, my background is in anti-corruption. So making sure that the money is actually being used for what it's needed. And again, I believe that tenant participation will help with that. Then that is something that will help our public houses as well.
Thank you. Senator Kavanagh.
We have three overlapping crises. They were crises before COVID-19, and they're even more so now. It's evictions, housing affordability, and homelessness. And we have the means to address all of them. Starting with evictions, we need to strengthen the protections against eviction for people who are not in rent-regulated and public housing. We passed the strongest tenant protection legislation literally in the last half century anywhere in America in 2019, which I crafted as the chair of the Housing Committee. But we've got lots of people that lack those protections. We need to make sure that tenants facing eviction have attorneys available to them so they can defend their rights. We need to increase the supply of housing. We just did a $5.5 billion new capital plan in New York. It's the largest capital plan we've seen in a very long time. We also passed a law I mentioned just now allowing us to convert hotels. There may be as many as 170 hotels in New York that can be converted to permanent housing as a result of that law. We need to make sure that the suburbs surrounding New York are doing their part. One of the reasons this is a regional housing crisis, and it's partly because our suburbs, especially on Long Island, produce almost no housing at all. We also then need to make sure that we are addressing homelessness directly. We need better programs, we need permanent housing, and in addition to those capital subsidies I mentioned, the best way to do that is to subsidize the rent when people are unable to pay. I've proposed the Housing Access Voucher Program. I proposed it for the first time a few weeks before COVID hit. I got both the Senate and the Assembly on board with that program this year. It is something we're going to get done, and what I'm proposing is $1 billion annual expenditure to cover the rent of people who are unable to pay their rent. It would be modeled on the federal Section 8 program. It would ensure that people who have income are paying what they can, no more than 30% of their income. If we pursue each of these things and pursue the capital investments include renovation of our existing housing, I think we'll get there.
Thank you, Senator. Let me just mention that the questions and topics that we have tonight do come from the community. We did poll, ask for questions from our community participants, and so we tried to call them down and bring these issues to bear. My next question will be on homeless shelters. Ms. Fariello, you will go first. Communities throughout this district have come out angrily towards various types of housing that have been put under the umbrella of homeless shelters. And what I mean by that, namely, they include addiction treatment housing, or treatment for people under addiction, transitional housing for people coming out of the correctional facilities program, mental supportive housing, and single men's shelters. Yet we cannot allow people in need to languish. How would you add your voice to the community? And are there any solutions that a state senator can advocate for legislatively to address the needs of the people? Ms. Fariello?
Thank you. So I certainly think that there is, the issue of the homeless shelters is, I know one that affects Chinatown very deeply because very recently they wanted to build more homeless shelters. Chinatown has more than its fair share of homeless shelters. We have a district, and the district is large, and there are places where we can actually open other homeless shelters. They need a lot of oversight. A lot of them have not been run well. People who are homeless are afraid of actually going to these shelters. They're afraid for their lives. They're afraid for their health. And we need to make sure that the money that is being spent on these homeless shelters are actually helping people as opposed to just housing them. So I'm sorry, I know there was another part of the question.
Well, what do you think that you can do legislatively if you were to answer?
Right, so there's certainly, first of all, putting more money into our social services. That is key. We need people to get on, to get the help that they need in order to get back on their feet. Giving them a home is critical. We know that because being homeless is itself a stressor. But moving on and making sure that they have the equipment to get a job, to actually participate in society and come back strongly. So we can do that by funding programs that we know do this. There are plenty of programs even here in New York City that work, but we can look to other places around the country to get ideas as to how these programs are best effective.
Thank you. Senator Kavanagh and then Ms. Egorov.
Thank you. There are about 90,000 people who are homeless at any given moment in our state. And as long as you have that volume of people who are homeless, you are never going to be able to address their needs through increasingly, building various facilities. This community has a right to question the purpose of the facilities, the concentration of the facilities, and whether those facilities are serving the needs of folks in this community. And I and my colleagues have hosted forums so the community can get answers on those. But we also have to take steps to recognize that the goal ought to be to have as few people who are homeless, living in public spaces, and as few people in transitional settings, and more people in permanent housing. We have, so again, one thing is we allow people to get evicted because they can't pay their rent and for no other reason. We let them get evicted, we put them into very expensive settings that the taxpayers are paying for, and eventually they get back into permanent housing. In that circumstance, we ought to pay the rent in order to keep people stably housed. It's better policy, it's humane, and it's better for our communities. We also need to be more creative about making sure that people have access to permanent housing. For example, you mentioned in your question people who are coming out of detention, coming out of jail or prison. It is currently the law in New York that you cannot apply for permanent housing subsidies until you are out of prison. You are not considered unhoused while you're in prison, so you wait till that day. A great percentage of all people who come out of jail go directly into homeless facilities, into homeless shelters. We know these when people are getting out, we know what date it is. I'm proposing legislation that will change that and allow a more efficient process. There are many other things we could do. I mentioned a few of them in response to the question on housing, but we need to provide more permanent housing. Even the best programs that are providing services get full of people who don't have permanent housing to move them to, so they stay in the programs, and we've been generating more and more of these transitional programs.
Thank you. Ms. Egorov.
So my position is very clear. We should not build one more shelter until there is a full audit and oversight of the shelter's providers. The city is already spending more than $3 billion on homeless services per year. That accounts for almost $60,000 per homeless person. And what are the results that we're getting? This investment has been increasing in the previous years. Putting more money at this problem is not going to solve. We need to have a full audit, make sure that the money is being well used, and it would be great if our government stop incentivizing addiction, because it's very correlated, the problem of homeless and addiction. And we have now in the subway ads where they say how to use heroin responsibly. I don't know how you use heroin responsibly. And you have shelters where you now can use drugs in communities. I talk to families here whose preschool kids cannot now go to the park because the park is an open drug used market. So we really need to make sure that the rights of our community is being respected, and making sure that we're not just putting $3 billion of the city's money on the shelters that are not solving the problem.
Thank you. My next question will start with Senator Kavanagh, and then Ms. Egorov, yes, and then Ms. Fariello. Question is on public safety, subway attacks, street crimes, anti-Asian and anti-Semitic hate crimes. A general sense of uneasiness has created a pall over this city. Bail reform was enacted to address the systemic inequity in our prison population. Yet the mayor has asked for judicial discretion on the dangerousness standard. Governor Hochul passed some bail reform laws in her budget. So where will you stand on this issue if it comes up again in the next legislative session? Senator Kavanagh.
Yeah, so I'm going to try to address, it's a complicated question for 2 minutes, but just, I've lived in this city my whole life, and I lived through the days when New York was very dangerous through every neighborhood. You watched your back. We had extraordinarily high rates of violence, rates of muggings. We don't want to go back to that. It involves, solving that involves, as one of my colleagues already said, supporting our police and making sure they have the resources to police our communities effectively. There was a while where it seemed like all the talk was just about police accountability. Police accountability is important. I voted for a package of police accountability bills in 2020 that I was very proud of. But people in our communities and good police officers understand we want both accountability and effectiveness and presence. And we need to do both of those things, and I think we can. We need to recognize that bail reform, so bail reform says that you cannot be held for certain crimes that you have not yet been convicted of on a first offense if it is a minor crime. And there has been some adjustments to that. I mentioned the first offense. We made a change in the law that says if you commit a subsequent crime while you're out on bail that would be considered minor, you can now be held for on multiple offenses. We are seeing a crime spike in every major city in America. Bail is certainly a part of the dynamic. It is particularly a part of the kind of minor petty crimes we've seen. It is not, for the most part, driving the violence. And when people talk about judges' discretion, every time there is a judge that allows someone out of jail in their discretion and that person does something bad, the tabloids pick it up and say the judge shouldn't have had discretion. When the judge is holding somebody, when the judge is not holding somebody because they say they don't have discretion, we talk about discretion. It's a complicated issue, but I believe that if we get it, we can do it in a just way, we can do it in a fair way, and we can drive crime down as we did in a prior generation.
Thank you. Ms. Egorov.
I want to start by saying that I grew up in Brazil, which is a very violent society, and so I know very well how it feels. Every time you go out of your house, you are afraid. And my husband and I, we feel so blessed to be raising our kids here in New York City. But what has happened over the past few years is that our legislators have taken our safety for granted, and they passed laws that have made us unsafe. New York State now is the only state in the country where judges don't have the discretion to keep people behind bars if they are a threat to public safety. That needs to be changed. That law should have never been passed in the first place. Our police officers, as I mentioned, they are demoralized because they are not going to risk their lives to arrest somebody who they know it's going to be put out in the street the next day. We need to change that law. For bail reform, the intent of bail reform was to correct an injustice that exists in our system, that sometimes people wait for a very long time for their trial. The solution is to make sure that the trial happens faster, but not that people are out in the street after they have committed a crime. And I also think we need to change the discovery laws. I have talked to many police officers who said that now they do not have the time necessary to really provide all the evidence so the prosecution can do their job. And that, I think, is a very serious problem that we also have to solve. But regardless, as I mentioned at the beginning, even if it is corruption Wall Street, shoplifting, or hate crimes, if you commit a crime in New York City, there has to be a consequence for your actions. And that's what I'm going to work on. And I think also it starts, as I mentioned, to removing the DA, because DA has refused to do his job, and we have in writing he said that he is refusing to do his job. Thank you.
Thank you. Danyela.
Thank you. So I think one of the key things that would help us in safety is helping our police officers. And we can do that by unburdening them of taking care of issues that are not that are better addressed by other service providers, whether it's mental health service providers or social workers. We have a number of different programs across the country that have proven to be successful when they pair up the police with social services or mental health providers. They have been not only successful, but they have saved these cities millions of dollars. And then the police are more able to address the issues of violent crimes and of hate crimes. They have more freedom to actually investigate and actually go after them. You know, the problem with the conversation around bail reform is that bail reform goes to jails. That means that you have not been you've only been accused of a crime. And we live in a society where we believe that you are innocent until proven guilty. So to be held in for years, you know, it was Khalif Brauman who was held in for 3 years for stealing a backpack, was never proven. He eventually, I think he pleaded guilty, and it was so horrible for him to have spent those 3 years in jail that he committed suicide. And this is a civil right that we can't overlook, and we can't blame bail reform. The other important thing, when we blame bail reform for the rise in crime, we are missing what is actually causing the rise in crime. And that is a lack of housing, that is a lack of health care, that is a lack of services that our people need. We need to be safe. Our police officers need to be supported. We need to have better communications with our communities and the police officers. But I think this is really important that we make sure that the police officers are equipped by being able to deal with what they are, the crimes that they need to deal with.
Thank you. So that's our 4 basic questions. I'm going to use my moderator discretion, since we're doing very good on time, and I'll add a couple of more questions that you can have 2 minutes to respond to. So another contentious issue in this community has been the jail that's down the block. So in short, do you oppose, support, or seek an alternative solution to building the mega jail in Chinatown? And I guess we will start this time with Ms. Egorov.
I absolutely oppose the building of the Chinatown jail. The jail is going to cost a lot of money to the city, and at the end, it's going to house fewer inmates than the current jail. I think it's very important also to understand why the plan for this jail came to exist. There is an attempt to close Rikers Island, where there are a lot of problems happening, and there is a threat of federal takeover. I saw that now the judge approved a new plan, and so it's going to stay locally managed for some more time. But if we close Rikers Island, there is no other option unless we have these local jails. And so I think it's very important to understand how these 2 issues are correlated. And the question that I asked when I came here to the community to protest when they were starting to build that jail is, why do we think that this new jail will be so well managed? It's going to be managed by the same organizations, the same government that manages Rikers. So there is no reason for us to think that the problems that are happening there are not going to be happening right here in this community. As I mentioned, it's a very expensive plan. There is no logic or rationale to justify, and it should be stopped. And Mayor Adams campaigned on the promise that he would stop the Chinatown jail. And I think it's very important for us to hold him to this promise.
Thank you. We would go to Ms. Fariello.
Thank you. So I am also very much opposed to the Chinatown jail. 3 years ago, when the first rally was held, I was there. And I actually brought my daughter, and I said, she asked me where we're going. I said, we're going to protest a jail. And she said to me quite innocently, why would we build jails and not schools? And that's exactly right. Why are we spending money on jails? I was one of the Chinatown 10 who was arrested when trying to stop the bulldozers from taking down the jail. The jail not only is problematic from a criminal justice issue, which I'll come to in a second, but it's also it's a huge problem for our community, for the Chinatown community. The destruction, the taking down of the jail is going to cause incredible destruction. Already Chinatown is blocked off by Park Row being closed off, and now we're going to close off yet another area, and we're really strangling Chinatown at a time that we need to be helping Chinatown come back on its feet. There has been a proposal to bring the women off of Rikers and to renovate the jail as opposed to tear it down and rebuild a new mega jail. And to bring the women there so that rather than wait until 2027, they can come off of Rikers. There's no question Rikers needs to close. It is horrible, it is inhumane, it is a stain on our city. We need to close that. But we don't need to be building more jails. We need to be actually helping people move back into society again. And jails, again, are it's not prison, it's a jail, right? So people have not been convicted of these crimes.
Thank you. Senator Kavanagh.
Thank you. Just to briefly, just to connect this question to the previous question, if you want to have criminal justice policies that are holding people in jail before they're convicted, not allowing them out on bail, you do have to build a lot more jail space for that. And it's a delicate balance. At the height of our jail population in New York, we had more than 21,000 people in jail on any given day. The number now is something closer to 5,000. I don't have the current stats, but roughly a quarter of what we used to have. And that is an achievement. It is preferable not to be spending a fortune, not to be building facilities for so many people who have yet to be convicted of crime. People in jail in New York are in jail because they've been arrested and not convicted, or because their sentence is so short that it does not make sense to send them to one of our upstate prisons. I oppose the mega jail. When the city of New York, the prior administration, came to me and said, we're going to do a 50-story jail in Chinatown, I thought I was, hearing things. It happens that my district in Brooklyn is close to the Brooklyn jail, and engaged with the community and pushed for the administration to come up with a different plan, a plan with much less of an impact on our communities. And the prior mayoral administration really did stonewall the community and insist on their plan. They made some modifications in the ULER process, but these jails are still far too large and far too disruptive of our communities. It is true that the current mayor had made some commitments during the election, and I really am hoping that they will re-engage with this community and talk about what's necessary. There's been a jail there for many decades now. It is next to the courthouse. There is some need to detain people somewhere near those courthouses, but this plan makes no sense. And again, I've been opposed to it from the beginning, and I will continue to do so. And I should add, though, that I agree with my opponent to the right, that with Ms. Fariello, that keeping Rikers open is also not a viable option.
Thank you. I hope that reference to your opponent on the right was for locational and not political.
It depends on who's right here. My right.
Only kidding. We're still doing good on time, so I will add another question. This has to do with education. The specialized high school issue has been a pretty popular issue in our in the Asian community. The mandate that a test be used for admission to the specialized high schools is a state mandate. The mayor has proposed keeping the SHSAT for the existing specialized high schools, but opening new specialized high schools using multiple criteria. I would ask, do you agree, disagree, or do you have another opinion on this? And I think we will start with Ms. Fariello. I'm mistaken. You're first.
Thank you. So this is not an easy answer, because we know that the system we have right now is indeed, it excludes certain demographics in our city. There's no two ways about it. Only 20% of those in specialized high school now are either Black or Latino, and that's a problem. So the test that we're using is not inclusive. It's not allowing for that. Having said that, I am not an educationalist. That's why I adore teachers. I have 4 kids, and I can't, like I say all the time, I can't teach them to wipe their face, so I really have incredible respect for teachers. But I think we need to think about having another, even with the current specialized high schools, if we use the test, that's fine, but we also include to the top 10 from the middle schools across the city. So the top 10% students. So we're actually allowing more diversity to come into this. I do think increasing specialized high schools is a great idea. I don't know enough about it. I'd love to hear more. And I think that's really, a way that's important. But I also want to everyone to keep in mind that only 4% of our high school students go to specialized high schools. Only 4%. So we really need to be looking at our high schools the 96% of our students and making sure that they're getting a good education and that they're getting what they need to be also productive members of our society.
Thank you. I believe I should have went to Senator Kavanagh first, but I'm sorry. You'll
Happy
go
to
next.
defer. Okay, maybe I can do the lightning round faster.
Okay.
I think that again, this part of the problem here is that a policy of eliminating the current test was announced with virtually no communication with anyone. I actually spoke with the principal of Stuyvesant High School, who learned in the newspaper that the test for Stuyvesant was going to be eliminated as part of the process, rather than hearing about it from the administration. We also note there are 8 specialized high schools. Only 3 of them are required by law to be that test and that test only. The other 5 are at the discretion of the city. It is perplexing that we've been talking about this. We had an administration that wanted to eliminate the test as the sole criteria for those schools, and they had the absolute right to do that for 5 of the schools, and chosen not to do that with respect to any of the schools that they have the option to do that for. I do think that if you want the kind of diversity that my colleague was talking about, you do need to consider other mechanisms. We should not eliminate testing, standardized testing, as an important factor. It is an ability in this giant city to allow people to clearly distinguish themselves as capable of the kind of work that happens at Stuyvesant and other school, which is I'm also proud to represent now. But we need to make sure that it is a system that is fair, it is effective, and we need to recognize that people prep for this for multiple years. You can't be announcing after years of people preparing under a current set of rules that you're changing the rules and people need to do something new. So I think it's an important conversation to have. I will also note that I did not have the privilege of going to any of those schools, but I have colleagues who are members of the legislature who went to those schools who were also not consulted on how the law might change. So I think it is an important conversation to have. I think it is important to try to increase diversity in these schools, but we need to do it fairly, and I think a process that ignores testing entirely doesn't make sense. A process that has only one test as the way to get in is probably not ideal either. Thank you.
So I serve as the Vice President of Community Education Council, District 2, and I have a long track record defending accelerated education. I think the SHSAT should continue to be the only criteria for these 3 schools, and thank God that it's in the legislature, because otherwise the mayor would have taken out, the same way that he took out all the special admissions for middle schools, and we have seen the impact of that. We now have a lottery. We don't have any more way to find the best schools for each child, and every time the placements comes, I receive so many mails and calls and text messages from parents desperate. My kid is already ready to do Algebra 2, and they are going to a school that doesn't even offer Algebra 1. It makes no sense. We're not serving any kid when we don't find the best school for every child. It is true that only 4% of students are at the specialized high schools. And why is that? Because we have not opened new and more specialized high schools. There is no reason why a city like New York City would have only these high schools that really are making sure that students have access to a very, very accelerated education. In Boston, when I started my career in education over a decade ago, over 20% of the students end up in schools where require tests. There's no reason why. We know that there are more students that are qualified and capable to go get an accelerated education, and we are not offering this to them. And I think also it's very important to say that in education, the main problem is not a lack of resources. New York City now is spending over $40,000 per student. We spend on more than double the national average. And for what results? 50% of our kids cannot read at grade level. That's where we need to focus on. That's where Chancellor Banks is focusing on making sure that finally we have a curriculum that follows the science of reading, and our kids are going to have access to phonics.
Thank you. We're doing very good on time, so I'll begin our lightning round. It's a yes or no. If you want to expand on a sentence, that's fine. So staying on education, I think what we'll do is, okay, well, I'll start I'll try to go up and down, all right? So I'll start here. I'll stay on education. Given what you already know about the educational policies of the mayor and the chancellor, would you have denied, supported, or extended mayoral control for the mayor for more than 2 years?
Under this current mayor?
Yeah, so the mayor just received 2 years of mayoral control,
Right.
which was granted by the state legislature. Would
Right.
you
No, I
agree?
don't support mayoral, and there needs to be more parental input in the system.
Thank you.
We extended mayoral control for 2 years with more parental input, and I think that doing this in very short increments, like 2 years, doesn't make sense. You should not sort of have the governance structure of your school system expire every couple of years and have to rethink it. People need certainty. The mayor was elected. I mean, at minimum, we probably should give a mayor who's elected by the people 4 years. But I would propose not getting. We've been addicted to allowing this to expire repeatedly, so we can revisit it all the time.
Okay, thank you. Egorov.
I absolutely support mayoral control, and I think I don't understand why Mayor Adams was the only mayor who was not given 4 years on his first term. Mayor Bloomberg had that, and Mayor de Blasio also had. There's no reason why we should not have given 4 years to Mayor Adams.
Thank you. Staying on education, they just enacted class size restrictions in this giving mayoral control to the mayor. Do you support, Egorov will start down there, do you support class size restrictions?
I voted yes for that, so I do indeed support it.
Ms. Fariello?
Yes, absolutely.
Egorov.
This is a complicated issue to give such a simple answer. Some of the specialized high schools, they have very high class sizes, and the students are receiving a very high quality education. Only reducing class size, it cannot be our only strategy to improve education, and I think the bill that was passed, the city cannot afford, and it's not going to solve our problems. We also have a lot of difficulty now recruiting new teachers, and then you need to train them. So I would prefer my son, who is in 3rd grade, to have a great teacher in a larger class size than with a new inexperienced teacher with fewer students.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, again, Ms. Egorov, good cause eviction laws. Where do you stand on that in one sentence?
I am not for good cause eviction laws.
Okay, Senator Kavanagh?
Good cause eviction, for those who don't know, is the idea that people cannot be evicted from their homes for no reason at all. There needs to be a reason. The bill enumerates many reasons, and I think it's very important that we do that. I've been a sponsor for the bill from the beginning. I held the first public hearing of this year on this topic, and I think that we need to listen to the property owners and get the law right, but I think we should pass good cause.
Thank you. Ms. Fariello.
So I do support it, but I do want, we need to have more of a voice from the small property owners. We have 70% of our property owners in New York City own 4 or less units. So they have to be part of the conversation as well.
Thank you. We'll go back with you. 421A tax breaks for developers. It was taken away this year. It will probably come up again next year. What's your feeling on that in one sentence or two?
I do not support that. If we give tax breaks to developers, we must be asking for far more affordability.
It actually is expiring right now. Today is the last day of the current program. I think allowing it to expire, as I advocated during the legislative session, was the right thing. If we're going to invest enormous amounts of public dollars by foregoing taxes, we need to make sure we're getting, in exchange for that, good, high levels of affordability, good jobs, and also environmental considerations should be addressed in anything that's built with that kind of subsidy.
Thank you.
I agree with my opponents. There is no reason why we should be giving huge tax breaks for large developers.
Thank you. Staying on housing, Ms. Egorov, should the governor sign the Public Housing Preservation Trust Bill?
Yes, I do think he should sign this bill.
Senator Kavanagh?
I worked very extensively on this bill last year, and I made a commitment to a lot of our local tenant leaders that I would not support moving forward with that until there was adequate buy-in from the elected tenant leaders who represent the 500,000 people who live in public housing in city. I think it was a mistake for the city to go forward with that. There are some good things in that proposal, but at this point, I carried the bill last year. Another colleague carried it this year. It did pass, but I did not. It passed without my support.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Fariello.
No, to me, this is exactly the problem of introducing private funds into public service. We don't, you're going to turn the goal into maximizing profits and not services.
Thank you. Should all new buildings be all electric by 2027, Ms. Fariello?
Yes.
Okay. Senator Kavanagh?
I wrote a bill that provided for pretty much that and introduced it last May and fought very hard to get it done. And the Senate and it was not a deal to do it, but we have all electric building in New York City. It's absolutely critical that we stop building buildings that require fossil fuels well into the future. So it's a top priority of mine to get that done next year.
Thank you. Ms. Egorov?
In principle, yes, but I would want to learn more about the costs and benefits associated with this specific requirement. Every time we pass the legislation, it also creates a cost and prevents then development from happening. So especially when we are lacking housing, I would want to learn more about this issue to make that a requirement.
Thank you. Changing gears a little bit, the 24-hour worker rule, basically about home attendance. Who is responsible for that? Is it unclear legislation, or was it abusive agencies? Ms. Egorov, coming back.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
So there was an issue about the 24 workers working 24 hours, basically home attendants having to work 24 hours. Do you think it was because of unclear legislation that governed it, or was it because of abusive agencies that used that?
Well, my understanding is that there is no clear legislation, but if that's not the case, then it's clear the abuse of the agencies. Again, I think that, of course, we need protections, workers' rights, but I also think we need to allow people to work, be entrepreneurial, and there was a time in my life before I had kids that I had to work a long time. We make different choices at different times.
Thank you. Senator?
I'm going to go with neither on this. I think that, there's certainly, it's a very large workforce. There are certainly supervisors who didn't do the right thing with respect to their workers, but I don't think the agencies that are running these programs have been responsible for systematic abuse. It is really it's primarily a funding issue. We have decided to fund home care with this notion that we can pay somebody to work for 13 hours and they can be more or less off duty the other time, and we don't have to pay them, but they have to be physically on the premises. If you are taking care of someone and they need 24-hour care, you ought to be paid to be there for 24 hours. And I think that it's a major budgetary issue, but we need to address it. We took some steps to address it this year, but we didn't get it done, and we need to prioritize that next year.
Thank you. Ms. Fariello?
I think they're both responsible. Absolutely, the state should not have a law permitting the forced work for 24 hours for anyone. I also think the agencies took advantage of this loophole, and they actually required their workers to work these 24 hours. And when the workers did work the 24 hours, they required them to record only 13 of those hours. There are now 2 court cases that have found this to be true. So I find them to be both responsible.
Okay, thank you. Getting to the end here. Where is the best place to spend the $20 million downtown revitalization initiative in Chinatown? Ms. Fariello?
I'm sorry.
There's a $20 million grant from the governor to revitalize Chinatown. Where do you think that's best spent in this community?
I think the small businesses. I think our small businesses really can use the influx and the help, certainly on safety issues as well, make sure, and cleaning our streets as well. That would be really helpful.
Thank you. Senator?
I'm going to punt on this one because the whole concept of this program is that the state makes the money available and a very robust community process decides how to spend it. So I think it should be spent in the way that the community that is discussing this decides how is going to be best, because people who live and work in this community know best.
Thank you.
I agree we should have community input. I would probably, my input would be to focus on the parks and small business. I think that would be the two things that could really help the community to be back and to be more attractive to tourists again. Last Friday I was with my boys at Boy Scouts, and we were cleaning one of the parks here in Chinatown, and I was shocked of how dirty it was.
Thank you. And this is the last question. It's very important. Be careful how you answer it. Did you enjoy your time here tonight?
Is that lightning, or do we get a full answer?
You can take as long as, if it's positive, you can take as long as you want. And at this point, I'd like to have each candidate offer 2 minutes as a closing statement. We started with Ms. Fariello in the beginning, so I'm going to have Senator Kavanagh start it off and go reverse alphabetical order.
Great. I'll end where I began by thanking all of the participants, everybody who's here in this room to watch, and everybody who was watching it, on camera. And I want to thank my worthy opponents. I think it's been a great discussion, and I think I hope people watching see that there's a lot of complexity and but also a lot of good ideas that we're bringing forth in this election. I am running as someone who has spent a great deal of time trying to work to make sure that Democrats have functioning majorities in both houses of the legislature, and to use this moment in New York, where we have already demonstrated a great capacity to govern in a way that we're not seeing at other levels of government, particularly federal government, and to put together big solutions to big problems. I believe we can end homelessness. I believe we can address resiliency and climate change. I believe we can get our schools in order, and I believe we can resolve gun violence, which we haven't talked as much about today, but it's been a big priority of mine, and crime and safety in our communities. It's been a very great honor to serve this community for the last 4.5 years, and to serve in the legislature this is my 16th year now, and I think that I bring to this race the right experience and a track record of getting these things done. So I'm proud to be here tonight, and again, I thank the organizers and everybody who's joined us tonight.
Thank you. Ms. Fariello.
Thank you. So, as I said at the beginning, I am a lawyer, I am a district leader, I am a mom, and I am a community activist. And I am running to give our communities a voice, to bring true affordable housing and health care for everyone in our state, and a government that is present and transparent and accountable to you, to the communities. Our communities have been ignored for a long time. Our public entities are not transparent, and our government is not responsive. Whether it's been the Soho NoHo rezoning, building jails in Chinatown, or reforming our county committee, our communities' outcries have been ignored, and our neighborhoods have been disregarded and forgotten, and we've all been taken for granted. I've shown up and fought for our neighbors when their homes were threatened. I've stood up to the political machine when it tried to quash our voices. I've stood with so many of you in Chinatown to stop the mega jail. As diverse as our district is, and it is incredibly diverse and beautiful, our communities share the same goals: to stay in our homes, to care for our children and elders, to have access to health care, to be safe in our streets, and to have a government that works for us, the people of the communities. As your state senator, I will work with all of you to reach these goals and all the issues that matter to you.
Thank you. And Ms. Egorov, to wrap it up.
My husband and I chose New York City as a place where we wanted to raise our family. I grew up in Brazil, he grew up in Ukraine, and we met here in New York City, and we feel so blessed to be living here with our 2 boys. But over the last few years, I have seen our representatives failing us. They decided to open restaurants and concert halls before they opened public schools during the pandemic. They saw the violence in the streets and in the subway, and they did nearly nothing to stop it. And they saw all the impact of this in our economy, with taxpayers leaving the city, small business closing, women leaving the workforce at unprecedented numbers, and again, they did nothing. That's why I decided to run. I have worked for the last 10 years with educators to open new and innovative schools in low-income communities. Education was my passport to a better life, and that's what I've been doing also here as the CC. I will make sure that we bring school choice for our communities, that parents are at the driver's seat of their children's education, that we have jobs and economic prosperity, and most important, that we feel safe in New York City. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you, Candice, for being here. It was a pleasure to be with you tonight. Thank you again, and the best of luck to all of you.
Thank you.